Hi, good morning, everybody. Um, Thanks for joining us. Sorry to start a few minutes late. I just wanted to wait for a few folks to come in so we didn't have to do that awkward thing where we stare at each other while we wait and I have to fill the space with total dribble. Less talking for me, the better, I think. We are very excited to welcome Anne Ward, CEO of Newspaper Club, to 11Zs with CEC. I haven't done one of these in a while. I feel a little bit rusty, but I do love doing them and I'm quite looking forward to this one. Anne has been a champion and involved with Creative Entrepreneurs Club since the very beginning when it was like this little idea, and has been like totally on board and supportive when it was like a rumor. So I'm really appreciative of that, and has kind of stayed tuned watching us in the background, which has been lovely. And now we're lucky enough to bring her to the foreground to chat with us about thoughtful leadership. And this kind of comes out of a conversation that we had offline between the two of us a while ago about leading and leading through the pandemic and approaches people have been taking and kind of the thinking behind those approaches and kind of how to really create a supportive environment and make smart decisions for the business at the same time, which can also be in direct conflict with each other sometimes. So it's a really interesting conversation. I'm really pleased that Anne's willing to have an honest conversation with us about it. I think there's a lot to learn from it, as far as, like for me personally, I tend to be a really responsive person and have really quick ideas and solutions. And I really thrive on problem solving. And I'm not sure that's always the best way to lead. And I think Anne has a much more sort of thoughtful, considerate approach to me. So it's always really good to learn from other people and kind of understand their thinking. So it's quite exciting. Thank you all for joining us. If you haven't been to an 11Zs before, it's a really casual in conversation. And if you have any questions, just drop them into the chat box and we'll get to them. We do these every middle Wednesday of the month at 11. So check them out. They'll be, I think we're done for this year. I think this is our last one for this year, but we'll start again in the new year. Anyway, enough from me. Anne, thank you for joining us. Could you do a brief introduction of yourself and kind of a overview of your journey up until you joined the Newspaper Club?
Yeah, sure. So the kind of origin story is I started off studying film and TV because that was a new thing to study when I could go to university. That's what I was interested in, but that turned into an English degree. I studied mostly English language, and I still love writing and words and meaning and all that kind of thing. For quite a long time, I thought it's a strange degree to have, you know, for where I am now, but I've really come to appreciate it. You can never know enough about words and language and being, you know, comfortable talking, speaking, writing, all that kind of thing. So when I was a student, I got a summer job working in libraries, Glasgow District Libraries. I just absolutely loved it. I thought I've found my people. You know, I'd always gone to the library. My dad had worked in libraries as well, and just loved the atmosphere. Really enjoyed meeting people. Being close to so many books was just great and really helpful while I was studying English. So I did a postgrad in librarianship. You do need to study to be a librarian. It doesn't just happen. You go away and get qualified. And after that, I worked for 10 years in Glasgow Caledonian University in the library there, which was really good. And what was interesting about that time was libraries were always there were always early adopters, you know, which they don't necessarily get credit for. But libraries were really aware of the internet and what was happening there. And they were already using things like bulletin boards, which were, you know, this was pre-World Wide Web. And I thought it was really interesting that information was starting to go online, and it was interesting to have access to all the things that you didn't have, easy access to things that you didn't have before, and also to see how people reacted to that. Because people were absolutely terrified of computers. You know, some people still are, but at that point, that was kind of the norm, that, you know, they wanted to come into the library and look at something in a book. If you tried to show them a computer, they just didn't know what to do with it. So I thought that change was really interesting, and I got access to quite a lot of training. That was the other thing that libraries were always really good at, you know, kind of developing people, training you up. So I got trained in developing websites, when at that point that meant writing it out character by character in Notepad, you know, open brackets, HTML, close brackets, and setting up your pages. Everything was done by hand, which was great. It was a bit of an art form. Obviously, that has completely moved on, but it meant, you know, that was a really exciting thing to be part of. It completely changed the job, and it also changed what I was interested in. I started my own website just kind of to be able to practice on things, and just to have a space to put things on it. I had my first son around about the same time, and I think I kind of lost my identity a little bit. And this website, which was just a collection of things I had found on the internet or pictures I'd taken or whatever, was kind of like, it was like kind of an outsourced personality kind of thing, where I felt like I didn't really have one anymore. And through that website, as other people were starting blogs, this is all kind of changed now, but in those early days, people were starting to write websites that were about the things that they were interested in, and kind of link up with other people who were doing the same. So job-wise at that time, I left Glasgow Caledonian University and moved to DFID, which is Department for International Development in East Kilbride, which is now part of the Foreign Office. And I was a website manager there. So, you know, I'd gone from being a librarian to a website manager because a lot of the principles are the same. It's about organising information, making it clear, making sure that people can find things. And I worked at DFID for 3 years. That was interesting because it was, in inverted commas, a good job. You know, when I got it, I thought, wow, this is amazing. You know, I'm in the civil service and this is really prestigious, but I just didn't really enjoy it. I think I wasn't prepared for life in the civil service. I didn't realise that it was such a bubble.
You left your library tribe, your people.
Yeah,
the dark side.
Big mistake, and I still haven't found my people again. But yeah,
we're here.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a culture shock doing that job. So after that, I moved to Learning Teaching Scotland, which is now Education Scotland, and again, that was another big public sector organisation. You know, interesting place to work, but I didn't quite fit in with I like the idea of being in the public sector, but I found it slow and frustrating, you know, and there was a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of silos with different departments and things like that. So there was a time when I was thinking, yeah, I don't really think this is working out for me. But the people who I had met outside work through my own blog and kind of personal interests, social media and things like that, 2 of them offered me jobs at the same time. So I went freelance and I worked for Folksy, which is an online craft platform, kind of like the British Etsy.
They're still there?
Yeah, they're still going. So this was 10 years ago, when Folksy was still relatively new. They needed someone to be their kind of community managers, customer support person. And I also met Russell, Ben and Tom, who had the idea for Newspaper Club and wanted to get that off the ground. They had already published their own newspaper, which won a design award that year. It just kind of, at the time, printing something was going so far against the grain that everyone was like, wow, look at that, a printed newspaper, you know, that you've made yourself. And it just really caught a moment where people were, you know, the feeling was that print was dead, everything was going online, but actually they were saying, hang on, print's really good. You know, it's really comfortable to read in print, especially if you want to read long form content. It's just not that nice to read it on a computer, and being able to kind of, what they wanted to do was curate your own newspaper, you know, so the goal of the company was to be able to make personalized newspapers in the sense of it's got the articles that you want to read, whether that's through your sort of what you've collected in your bookmarks, or through a kind of content provider where you could say, right, I just want all the stuff about gardening and Arsenal or something like that. You know, you kind of got your own collection. So that was the idea for Newspaper Club, and that meant I left my job and started working for Folksy and Newspaper Club, and then eventually Newspaper Club took over as a kind of full-time job. So when it started, I was kind of, I didn't know what I did anymore, because I'd come out of librarianship and gone into website management, and I was like, and what is this thing? I don't know. But that was kind of what they needed. You know, there were really only two of us working there when we started. Tom was the tech guy, he was building all the infrastructure, and I was doing everything else, you know, the orders, the finance, speaking to people, developing the service. And I absolutely loved it. You know, it was quite frightening at times, obviously, because people were suddenly giving us lots of money to custom make something for them, which we had to get right. And, you know, I've come into this with no business experience and no printing experience either. So total baptism of fire, you know, to run a business and kind of try and understand what we're doing. But in a way, that was what was helpful, because our customers were outsiders as well. We wanted to be able to make newspaper printing easy for everybody, not just, you know, publishers or designers. And being in the situation where you don't know anything yourself means you understand what other people are coming at when they look at your website, and they don't understand what things mean or don't know the technical terms and stuff like that. So that helped us to, you know, keep working on making the process easy. What we want to do is to make newspaper printing easier for everybody. And that's kind of been the last 10 years at Newspaper Club, just working on that.
And it went from strength to strength.
Mm-hmm.
So it started out being sort of this ambiguous, like, let's solve this problem or provide this service. And now, like, over the 10 years, it's kind of become an absolute, like, solid business and we've got a good customer base. Yeah,
I mean, it totally caught a wave. You know, there's a real affection for print, and there's a real affection, there's an appreciation of newspapers, you know, that they're a really accessible format. You know, they're familiar to everybody. They're very tactile. You know how a newspaper should look and feel, but they're not very precious. You know, and I think what a lot of people like about them is they're not glossy. We work with a lot of companies who kind of, they like that, the down to earth side of things, and they like, it's also a bit more environmentally friendly than other forms of print. You know, that all of our paper is either recycled or from a sustainable source, and everything is completely recyclable. So in a way, when people are looking for something which is pick-upable, is the word that somebody has used, they've found that newspapers work better than magazines. We printed something for Topman, and they printed a newspaper because they had done magazines, put them in the shop, and nobody touched them because they thought they had to pay for them. But with newspapers, you think, oh yeah, okay, that's for me, pick it up and get looking at it. So yeah, I mean, it really just took off in a way that nobody expected, and we've got a really wide customer base all over the world. About a third of our business is in the UK, a third is in Europe, a third's in the US, and also, you know, Australia, New Zealand, things like that. And we've got a really wide range of customers where we work. You know, we can print something as a prop for a play, or a birthday present for somebody, or, you know, a wedding order of service, or we can be printing thousands of copies for big brands and, you know, big organizations and repeat customers. So it's a very interesting, it's a really nice place to be, actually. You know, thinking back about those early days when we didn't really know what would happen, but 10 years on, we've had customers that I wouldn't have dreamt we could ever have, you know. And it's just amazing when you see somebody get in touch and think, oh, I'm going to print for them, I'm so excited, you know, and then seeing what they do.
And so alongside that, the team grew.
Yeah. So thankfully, there's not two of us anymore. We grew to 13. So we grew to 13. That's the most that we've ever had. Some of those people were part-time. So we've kind of hovered around about the 8 to 12 people mark. We're quite tight as a company. We've never been a big company. We've always been a small company. The business has grown, but the team has stayed pretty tight in the middle. And that's quite an interesting place to be. You know, part of that was not deliberate when we started out. We did try to get funding and investment, and nobody would touch us with a barge pole. You know, print was just a bad word. So we learned to stand on our own 2 feet pretty quickly, and you know, and we've been like that ever since. We've just got to make as much as we can, and then what we make goes back into the business. And if we need to take people on, we will. But we don't expand just for the sake of things. And we've ended up the people that we have got are very good at sort of multitasking, and you know, maybe covering things that in a normal job would be beneath them. But there's a really good spirit of everyone kind of pitching in and helping each other out, and you know, learning extra skills if that's what's useful.
Which must have been handy when the pandemic hit.
Yes. I was very grateful at that point that we weren't a huge company. You know, I just thought of all the people. Yeah, I thought of how big and how complicated businesses can get, and how it's easy to feel that you have to accumulate all this stuff, you know, whether it's offices or, I don't know, your own transport or staff or anything. And I was really glad that we hadn't done that. There really wasn't a lot of excess in the business. And that instantly made things a bit simpler, that there just wasn't as much to manage or to worry about when the pandemic hit.
So things are going really well. The pandemic hits and you're the boss. What happens? What like, you're like, okay, well, you know, customers are cutting back. What's the next steps?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was thinking. What are the next steps? And obviously it was impossible to know, you know, however much you prepare and think that you've planned ahead and all that sort of thing, no one was expecting the pandemic, and no one was really prepared. I think there are some things that you might have been prepared for in business, but this was definitely not one of them. So it was definitely an interesting time, and I think what helped us was we got the message quite quickly that things were going to become difficult for us. You know, the jobs just disappeared overnight. Normally March, April, May is our busiest time, but because a lot of the newspapers that we print are for distribution in some way, if you cut down on going outdoors, you know, you close shops, whatever, those jobs just get pulled overnight. So our business dropped to about 20% of what it normally was at this busy time of year, and we thought, go. But the advantage of kind of seeing that very quickly was we got prepared. What I would try and do really is not to panic about things, you know, just to think, well, this is a situation. And I think I'd had quite a difficult year in 2019. It was a good year for the business, but I had really struggled at different points and kind of felt, you know, started to feel a bit overwhelmed. And I had done a bit of work on myself to think, right, I've got to be able to be a bit more capable and kind of resilient, because I'm the boss, you know, and I can't crack, and I can't, you know, say, oh, I'm just going to take a month off and get myself together. You know, I've got to be there and be sort of capable and able to support other people. And I was glad that I'd been through that, because some of the kind of I don't know if you, mental techniques sounds like a bit of a strange thing to say, but things like mindfulness, which I'd never really got. I had read stuff about my mindfulness, and I just sort of thought it was for other people, because my mind just goes 100 miles an hour all the time. And this idea of, being sort of emptying your mind and being sort of quiet, I just thought, no, that's never going to happen. I've never managed to crack meditating or anything like that. But I did manage to find things that were kind of an equivalent for me, where I managed to just push everything to the back of my mind almost, and tune out a little bit. And for me, that was through being on the move. That seems to be my thing, that if I get really stressed, then go for a walk, sit on a train, get on a bus, anything that involves moving, and sometimes even just physical activity of one kind of another, was really helpful. So when the pandemic hit, I was really grateful for just feeling a bit, a bit more resilient, and being able to step back a little bit and not think, oh, this is awful, but just think, right, what is this? What's happening? And not rush into anything, because nobody knew what was happening. Everybody was in the same position, really, of thinking, what on earth is going on? And there were a lot of different opinions. I think some people kind of rush into making predictions of, this is what I think will happen. And I mean, I just didn't have a clue, so I didn't try and predict anything. I would always try and sort of look on the bright side, which is a strange thing to say, because obviously it was just awful. What was happening was completely horrific. The news at the time, which was all, the coffins lining up in Italy, it was just, terrifying, really awful, really frightening. So I don't, when I'm saying there was an upside, I don't want to, I'm not talking about that. The whole situation was awful. But what it did give us as a company was time and peace and quiet, which is something that you generally never wish for when you're in a business. But it meant that we suddenly had time to think about things. So we didn't have, we would normally be really busy with customers, and we don't have time to kind of improve things, or even just to sit down and kind of talk to each other. We suddenly had all that time. So it meant there was a bit of space to work out what to do. And I remember that each day felt like about a month, so it felt like I had to make kind of quick decisions, but actually leaving it until the next day was fine. So I tried to just absorb it all, absorb everything that was going on, see how everybody was feeling, talk to our suppliers and understand what kind of situation they were in, and just generally observe for a little while and try and understand, right, what does this actually mean for people on the ground, and then think about what did that mean for us as a business, and first of all, really, what did it mean for people in the business? And it meant that I think something I've learned is, if you focus on the human side of things, the business side really falls into place afterwards. I think you've kind of got a choice about what to do in any situations, and it's quite easy to just think about the money, or to think, oh, this is looking really bad, right? Let's cut everything. How can we save money? And that wasn't a high priority for me at the time. The main thing was just making sure that the team were okay, because if the team were okay, we would be able to get through everything. I was conscious that at the start of it, nobody knew how long it would last. And when people were saying, oh, we'll still be locked down at Christmas, I thought, oh, don't be ridiculous. So I definitely was not expecting something that went on for so long. But I think it was sort of useful to think, yeah, this might last a long time, and we just don't know what we're heading into. So the first priority really was making sure that the team was okay and that they were kind of safe. And obviously some people were really anxious about it. and people were reacting to it in different ways. And also everybody was in a completely different set of circumstances, which meant that, you know, there wasn't one solution for everybody. Everybody, you know, some people had partners who had lost their jobs, or they had kids that they were suddenly having to homeschool. You know, other people were on their own, they might have been a bit isolated. So it gave us a bit of time just to kind of check in on each other, just to kind of stick together for a little while and make sure that everybody was okay, and to talk to each other. And during that time, you know, people kept saying, what do you think will happen? And I said, I've got no idea. You know, I didn't want to bullshit anybody and say, this is what I think will happen, because I had absolutely no idea. But it meant we got to kind of settle ourselves as a company. People have always worked from home. We've always been really flexible about that, you know, and about work-life balance. So that was easier for us. Most people could work from home, and we managed to get everybody out of the office, you know, collect what you need and get set up at home. And, you know, and then as the lockdown hit, the furlough scheme came in, and we started to think, right, what does that mean for us? And that was quite a difficult decision as well, because I couldn't work out who was worse off. You know, is it worse to say to someone, yes, you've got to work, or yes, you've not got to work? Because even though in some ways I would love someone to have said, right, that's okay, you don't have to work, you're on full pay, it's fine, we'll call you when we need you. I don't think I would have enjoyed it at that time when there was so much anxiety. So that was a difficult decision to think, right, I'm going to have to pick people here. What we tried to do was kind of figure out what our place in the pandemic was as a company. And I definitely thought it's not about us. You know, this is not a marketing opportunity, you know, which is, I think there's a bit of pressure to always feel that, you know, how do we do well out of this? And actually I thought this is just not the moment for newspapers. You know, it's important for us to stay operational, so that if somebody needs us, we're here. But this is not the moment to try and jump in front of people and say, hey, what about this? Because everybody was so, you know, the big thing was PPE in hospitals and the NHS. So I was really trying to avoid anything that was a sort of crass marketing move, but at the same time realising that a lot of our customers were in lockdown. It hadn't come to them yet because they were in Europe or the US. So we needed to kind of tread that line of being there and showing that we were open for business, we were ready to go, but not kind of getting in anybody's face. And really what we were trying to do was just work out, assuming that our business was going to be drastically reduced for the next month or so at least, what did we actually need to keep that, you know, keep up the front of, hi, we're open, we can do your stuff, but not have too much, you know, not have people sitting about with nothing to do. So in the end, we furloughed 2/3 of the team, and 4 of us stayed on. And between the 4 of us, we could manage tech, marketing, customer service, finance, you know, and all the basics. So we could keep everything going, and everybody else was completely furloughed. And I just spoke to everybody individually to make sure that they understood why that had, you know, why those decisions were being made.
I remember you saying that you were thoughtful about parents who were homeschooling. That played into your decision-making process. And I thought that was so lovely that, I mean, I went back to America because I couldn't work and have my kid at home. But I mean, I couldn't have my kid at home. I would have rather done anything. But
Yeah.
but you know, to be a leader, thinking about like, what do you need for your sanity and for the situation you're in, pretty forward thinking and considering.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, I didn't think twice about that, to be honest, you know, because I couldn't understand how you could expect anyone to work while they were homeschooling. It's just absolute madness, but I know a lot of people were expected to do that. But we were fortunate that we could do that. You know, we furloughed everyone who had young kids, and they just had the space to get on with it. And everyone seemed okay with that. You know, just really had to say that this is no reflection on you or your worth as a person. This is a completely sort of pragmatic decision where we just don't know what's going to happen. We're kind of going in hard with it and cutting everything that we need to instead of whittling it away. You know, I think when there's so much uncertainty, what I didn't want to do was add to that, you know, and have people have a situation where somebody's in half the week and then another person comes in the other half of the week. You know, it just seemed like for everybody's sanity, the best thing to do was simplify things as much as possible and be really, really clear about what the situation is. So, you know, to say to everybody, right, you're furloughed, you know, you're on full pay, this is what you need to do, this is what you mustn't do. And then once that was done, and everybody seemed okay with it, the four of us who were left kind of formed a kernel where in the early days at least, we just had a coffee together every day at 11 o'clock and just kind of checked in on each other and said, how you doing today? You know, what's happening? And the people who were working needed something to get on with. So again, having this time, you know, this time which had magically appeared from nowhere, meant we had the chance to look at some of the projects which had always been pushed to one side that were just a bit too complicated. And I really needed something to get on with. I cut my hours down to 3 days, so did our CTO, but I was really grateful of having some kind of structure. I don't think I would have coped very well with just not working or having some kind of routine. And it meant I really wanted to pour myself into something that was going to be kind of interesting and fruitful. So we redesigned our sample newspapers, which is, we've got 13 of these, which is why it's such a big job. We've got 13 individually designed newspapers that show off different sizes and paper types and things like that. And that was a job that had been I'd been pushed off for years and years, that these needed a bit of a edit, a bit of a refresh. So we worked with DA, who are a design company based in Glasgow, who are just fantastic. Always a pleasure to work with. Really good ideas, and it meant that we actually got through this really chunky piece of work, and it gave us something to talk about. You know, it gave us something to shout about. You know, and to kind of relaunch them, and that did get a lot of people in touch. You know, later in the pandemic, when they were actually, there was that kind of creative burst where some of the people who were freelance, you know, people had settled a bit and new sort of creative projects were starting to flourish. So things like the, I don't know if you can see it, the NHS, people were starting to print pandemic related newspapers. You know, it might have been their kind of observations on it, or things like the community projects, community newsletters. And it was really good to kind of feel like, right, we do have a part in this and something is starting to come back.
Also, it must have been nice for people to start coming to you rather than, as you said earlier, you don't want to be tasteless and go out selling. So without selling, you were selling just by having the kind of content of your new project. Mm-hmm. What a lovely thing for the folk who were there to be able to work on something that's creative and satisfying, but without the urgency and without clients and customers and whatever. That's a really nice sort of transitional project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what we realised as well was that some companies were booming during this, and you know, just being able to kind of sit back and observe for a little while meant that we could see how the business was changing and look for opportunities where maybe we could try and reach more of those companies. Things like mail order business was really rocketing, and we work with quite a lot of companies who print a newspaper to sort of tell their story and put it in with their products. So it meant there was more of that going on, and things like product catalogues, food boxes, things like that. We started to get more orders from people like that. Companies started to do remote conferences where they didn't have their employees in the building, but they had a pack that they wanted to email out, and they would make a newspaper and, you know, send that out to their employees. So it just meant we had to be sort of aware of what was happening, and always ready to react, and then just had to kind of monitor the situation and go very softly, you know.
So I want to get to, I'm super interested in how all of this challenged you as a leader. But before we talk about that, I'm interested in what's happened since, and bringing people back off furlough and things picking up again, and how that all those decisions pay dividends, and how you kind of now, what's happening now.
Yeah. So in a way, looking at it now, you know, so I suppose we're almost 2 years into the pandemic, which is just nuts.
Mental.
Yeah, it's insane. And though I definitely look back on those early days as the good bit, which is bizarre because, you know, it was awful. It was awful in so many ways. But that whole period of everyone's at home, everyone's got a bit more time, everyone's got out for long walks, you know, there's a sort of community spirit and a collectiveness and a creativity. Something good definitely happened at certain points. And I think now that we're further in, you know, so what happened was we bumped along, you know, things got better, but they have never got back to where we were. You know, we're still, not struggling, I would say, but still kind of affected by everything. It's just been so disruptive. And because, you know, so many of the businesses revolve around physical activities, a lot of that is only just coming back now. So it meant that the business was really quite subdued. But we brought everyone back kind of late summer, and then this time last year we were just heading into another lockdown. Well, we did furlough people. We sort of furloughed everybody for a bit, and that didn't work particularly well. It was quite kind of disruptive for everybody, because everybody was in and out working different days, and it was sort of hard to get on with things. And then January was Brexit, which is by far the worst thing to happen to us. So we've kind of had this horrible double whammy of COVID, which was difficult, and then Brexit, which was just so much worse. And I had spent, you know, a lot of late 2020 preparing for Brexit, like I was, you know, like everybody was told to prepare for Brexit. Went to the HMRC seminars and kind of did what I thought I should have done, but it was just absolute chaos. Nobody was prepared for it. That, you know, the paperwork was a nightmare. A lot of things were just kind of coming in overnight. The communication about it was dreadful, and it meant that I had got to the end of 2020. You know, I remember at the end of 2020, everybody was saying, you know, this is great. It'll be good to see the back of this year. But then to go into a year that was even worse was pretty tough. So we're still recovering from that as well. We're now all back. Everyone was back full time, but we're now being hit by what's called the Great Resignation, where 3 people have left in the last few months. And that, you know, we're just sort of coming to terms with that as well. How does that affect the business, and what do we need to, how do we need to adapt to cope with that?
And is any of that a blessing in disguise? Because like, yes, if you're not fully recovered, I mean, it's in some ways, I always think it's nicer for people to leave than to be you needing to let them go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when you know, you can sort of see some of it. I could have seen coming, you know, that people were maybe not, just wanted to be somewhere else, basically. But I think it's been a combination of things. You know, someone was offered just a job at a much higher salary, you know, and that is difficult
to feel like, you know, we will try to pay people well, but now in certain industries, people can earn an absolute fortune, you know, and it's quite difficult to compete with bigger businesses. So, you know, it means that we're used to being a small business and to being kind of scrappy and, you know, getting through things like this. I'm sure we'll get through it. It's just, I kind of think, you know, with the timing, I think, be nice to just get a bit of a break from the kind of constant disruption. We've also got things like paper shortages, and paper shortages and paper prices are going through the roof. So all of that stuff about, you know, the gas prices and price, that's also hitting us as well. So it's definitely, you know, we're still standing, but it's been a rocky ride.
I guess it's never boring. You could look at it that way.
True. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
So to that point, I think it'd be really interesting to ask you how, I mean, I think it's quite clear how you've been challenged as a leader. It seems endlessly challenging, but I guess, you know, what you spoke about earlier about trying to be actively mindful and, you know, take care of yourself, I think has never been more true, and kind of having to continue your practice in conscious resilience because the hits just keep on coming for you. What are the big takeaways? What were the big learnings as a leader, and kind of things you might have done differently, or, you know, things you're really proud of?
Yeah, I think you've really got to look after yourself, and I think sometimes it doesn't seem that seems like a very selfish thing to do, you know. And I think if you're used to sort of looking after other people and putting them first, it can be hard. I sort of had to make myself do it and think, actually, I need this time off, and I need to go away, and I need to make sure that whatever I'm doing in my kind of habits are helpful to me. So I changed my diet. I went kind of mostly vegan, cut down caffeine, cut down alcohol, all the things that it kind of tells you to do for your health. I did them and I found that they worked really well for me. I really try and get a good night's sleep. I'm very precious about getting a good night's sleep, and I just try to kind of keep in touch with myself, really, and think, you know, and constantly think, right, how do I feel? How do I feel? And change anything that I could to make sure that I felt good, you know, I felt healthy, energetic, calm, and things like, you know, keeping away from screens. You know, I remember at some point the rolling news, just when you get caught up with the rolling news, was horrendous. So we started a film club in the house, just the four of us, where we watched a film every night, and everybody, I've got two kids, everyone got to pick a film. It was just a rota, and we watched a film every night, and it meant everyone kind of focused on something. We all got together, we focused on something else, and we got away just from the kind of relentlessness. So I think I've really learned to sort of monitor myself and kind of understand when. I know now from not looking after myself what the kind of early warning signs are. And, you know, the other week I just had a real kind of pity party where I thought, it's so unfair, my life's so hard. And generally that is a sign for me that I just need to take a break. And one of the things that kind of recharges me is just going out somewhere and wandering about and taking pictures and stuff like that. So I did that and just felt so much better for it. So I think it's really worth keeping an open mind about what makes you feel better and what makes you feel worse. You know, it's not the same for everybody. And it's really worth just trying to sort of keep an eye on yourself and try and anything if you feel that you're stuck or you're overwhelmed. What I did, just kind of thought, right, I have to sort this out one way or another, and tried a million different things, read self-help books, started a journal, tried acupuncture. You know, I just kind of went into everything with an open mind and then thought, right, did that help? Do I feel better after that or not? And that's a kind of constant process. I've also got a coach, John Leatham, who is in the CEC course, and he's absolutely great. I think sometimes it's really worth making sure that you've got some kind of support network. And he's great because he is very supportive, but he's also quite tough as well, you know, so you can't go into him and say you're fine if you're not fine. He is like a psychic kind of ninja, and he's very good at just kind of giving you a gentle push to say, right, you need to sort that thing out.
I think a lot about, how therapists have therapists, and I think leaders, other leaders, to be their sounding boards. And, it's relevant to everyone who's here. A lot of you have signed up for it, but, Rachel's leading a leadership group in our little meetups, our monthly meetups. And I just think having other peer leaders, people at a similar place of their leadership journey to soundboard off of and to talk to and to be like, that's a bit shit sometimes. Or even like I've done a thing and I'm really flipping proud of myself and I feel like I can't talk about it anywhere else. I think having that support, someone to sympathize and empathize or celebrate with, we don't get enough of that as leaders. We're often isolated in our organization for being the leader, and there has to be some distance, I think, professionally. So who do you talk to? And it's so important that you have that person. I think that's a really brilliant thing to do for yourself and for your organization, that you have somewhere else to filter that stuff, because otherwise it seeps out at work and that's not where it belongs.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I would always try and be honest and kind of upfront with people, but sometimes it's just not appropriate. It doesn't mean that you have to be dishonest, but certainly if you're going through something that's difficult or uncertain, I don't want to pass that on to other people if I know that will worry them. I'd rather just sort of take my fears somewhere else and sort them out and, try and keep on an even keel as much as possible.
My takeaway from you talking, the two things I find really impressive about your journey and your story was the authenticity that you maintained and the clarity. And I think those were huge gifts to your team, whether they know it or not. And I think they do. Being able to say, this is what we're going to do. And, this is why I've made the decision. And I think that this is like the best route forward. And I just want you guys to be like furloughed and not have the stress because of this, and this, like just saying, I don't want to dip in, dip out, try this, try that, because I think that just messes with everyone. That's such a good message, because in a world of unknowns and anxiety and sort of is it, isn't it, to have one thing where you have control and certainty is so, it's like an island and an oasis. And I think that's brilliant. And, just being authentic as well and saying, I don't have all the answers. I'm doing the best I can within the confines that I find myself. And I hope everybody can, be a part of this conversation and we'll figure it out together. Is, that vulnerability is actually very strong leadership. So well done.
Thank you. That's nice.
This is a nice place.
Okay. Yeah.
Take it. Put it on your LinkedIn. That can be my. So for everybody here, I just thought it'd be, if there's any, you've sort of highlighted some, but top tips for thoughtful leadership, any books or podcasts, or, even getting a coach is probably a really great tip, and I think everybody should have somebody, whether it's a mentor or a coach or just a group, but somewhere. But any other tips that would be useful?
There were a few books that I enjoyed. This book called Company of One by Paul Jarvis, which is really interesting. And that is about he is literally a company of one, and it's talking about the benefits of being small and, breaking down some of the myths of, you have to be really big to be successful. So that was an interesting one. I got quite a lot out of Atomic Habits by James Clear. I got to be honest, I don't read a lot of management books or, that kind of thing, but Atomic Habits by James Clear. Eric Barker is someone who he writes about kind of the neuroscience kind of things. So it's stuff about, how your mind works, and is quite good if you're looking for help with things like procrastination or anxiety. It's quite short stuff, and it's enough that you can just read through it and think, yeah, I'll try that, or I won't try that, or I've tried that, it didn't really work for me. It's all quite light, this stuff. I think that is maybe about it. Also, this is probably another thing in itself, but kind of decluttering. I know Marie Kondo is a bit of a cliche now, but I actually found decluttering my space was really, really helpful. Decluttering my mind seemed to follow from that, however it works.
I say all the time, the purge is real. I have halved this house in the last 6 months since I came home. I had this urgent need to just purge, and everything must go. Like my son's toys, everything's going. Like it was so satisfying. And I think it was incredibly calming. So I totally relate to that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think there's something about being able to let go of things. Once you let go of physical things, I found that I had, it's easy to just carry a lot of baggage in one way or another. And I think letting go of the physical thing just gets you in the habit of letting go of a mental thing as well, and letting things kind of pass through, which is quite helpful.
And we kind of talked about this prior to this, everyone else showing up. But I think, the upshot of the pandemic was reprioritizing. So whether that's part of the people leaving the company and deciding they want to do different things, or, for me, needing less stuff and letting some of that stuff go and asking myself why I'm holding on to these things and, what they're doing for my life was really important. But I do think prioritization of what's important for you and what you want to be doing and how you want to use your time was a massive kind of upshot of having that time to think about those things.
Yeah, definitely.
And so having had that time, still want to be a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been absolutely fascinating. It is something that it's just been such a strange experience. And I'm sort of grateful for that, even though there's been ups and downs and hardships. If it's something that you can really kind of learn from, and it's something that I don't know if I would say I would enjoy it, but it was a very kind of rich experience and still is. And I think it suits me. I not everybody likes change, but I do. And I think that it's a very interesting time because things are changing and I don't think we've really understand where they're all going.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. We just have a question through before we're just out of time, but Rachel was asking, it's great to hear about you taking time for yourself as a leader. Did you have time to deal with staff? Did you have to deal with staff and colleagues who were kind of panicked by the pandemic, and how did you lead through that? You touched a little bit on it, but I just thought it was worth bringing back.
Yeah, a few people were really unsettled, and I think it helps that I know them quite well. Some people are unsettled by knowing too much, and some people are unsettled by knowing too little. And I'm kind of fortunate that I know everybody well enough to kind of know what they need. So it's really worth listening to people and trying to understand where their sort of fears are coming from, and then trying to address those fears. So for one person, I really just had to say, look, I think it'll be okay. When I tried to get away from predictions and kind of reassuring people too much, but I did genuinely think it's fine. We'll get through it. And that was all that she needed to hear. And other people, you maybe just need to talk through some things. I think sometimes if people can actually sort of vocalize what they're worried about, it starts to, it gets out of their head and gives it a bit of air, and maybe just feeling that they're being heard. And, I can't solve the problems, but I can listen to them, and at least they feel like they're being heard, and that can be quite reassuring.
I think being heard can often be more powerful than anything else.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we are right on the dot, right on the money, very professional. Thank you for making my job very easy and for sharing your story. I think it's incredibly helpful for everybody here and beyond to kind of just understand other people's leadership journeys and their approaches to things, because we only really learn by doing or kind of hearing from other people. And if they're repackaging their story and making it sound easier than it is, that can be really hard for people. So I think it's really great to hear your journey and your challenges and your successes. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for asking me. It's I'm not a big public speaker, but I knew that this would be an easy environment to be able to share things. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, lots of thank yous and appreciation in the chat. So know that you've had a positive impact on others. And hopefully we'll see you in the leadership group later this month or next year.
Yes, I will be, yeah, very glad to have another safe space to go into and have a moan or a chat or whatever.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that's what it's about, is having a moan or a chat, or just listening to other people's moan and chat and going, I'm not alone. I know Marie Anderson, who's here, said recently, after being in a leadership program, that it's just so nice to know other people are in the same boat. That's just, I don't need anything else. I just need to know that we're all, paddling as hard as we can together. So
yeah, no one's superhuman.
Yes. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone else for coming, and continue to come and see what we're all about. And there are some other chats in the resources with previous people that are also sort of related to leadership and kind of different approaches. And we have another leadership talk coming up with Jamie Enley in the new year. So stay tuned and come and visit us. And if you want to find Anne, she's in the directory on CEC, and you can approach her directly. She's more than happy to speak to people.
Thanks, Stu. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm now going to kick everyone out because that's the only way to end these things. But thank you very much. Thanks, Anne.